Hey everybody, welcome to a very special edition of The Thoughtful Bro here live streaming on A Mighty Blaze on both our Facebook and YouTube pages. We are so happy to have you folks here. The Thoughtful Bro is here every Tuesday at 2 for what makes great books tick and what makes great authors tick. The Mighty Blaze, if you're not familiar, is an all-volunteer initiative to help writers reach readers during COVID and beyond. You can find all of our author interviews on the Mighty Blaze Facebook pages and YouTube pages. At A Mighty Blaze, we're not asking for any money. If you want to support us, you can support us by liking us and following us on social media. If you want to find out more about A Mighty Blaze, you can go to our website, amightyblaze.com, and sign up for our weekly newsletter and get our list of author interviews every Sunday delivered to your inbox. We also have a Mighty Blaze podcast, which is now in its third season. If you are, in fact, in the mood to spend a little money today, please spend it on books about courage, about integrity, and about the fight to keep America's fragile democracy healthy. Books like Here, Right Matters by Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman. We have a lot of, there you go. We have a lot of questions to get to that came in on social media and that people have personally texted to me. I'm gonna try to get to all those questions at the end of the interview. Whether you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, if you want to ask a question live to Lieutenant Colonel Vindman, just pop it in the chat and it will make its way to us. Just a quick tease, I'm psyched that in 2 weeks on Tuesday, October 5th, I'm going to be interviewing literary fiction legend T.C. Boyle, who's got a new novel out called Talk to Me. That's in 2 weeks on October 5th. But for now, on to this week. Alexander Vindman is a retired U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel and the former Director for European Affairs for the United States National Security Council. Previously, he served as the Political Military Affairs Officer for Russia for the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and also as an attaché at the U.S. Embassy in Moscow. He currently is a doctoral student and fellow of the Foreign Policy Institute at the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. He is a Pritzker Military Fellow at the Lawfare Institute and a visiting fellow at the University of Pennsylvania Perry World House. Lieutenant Colonel Vindman is a decorated war veteran who served in South Korea, Germany, and Iraq, where he received a Purple Heart after being injured by a roadside bomb. During his Army career, Vindman earned the Ranger Tab, the Combat Infantryman Badge, Expert Infantryman Badge, the Parachutist Badge, as well as 4 Army Commendation Medals and 2 Defense Meritorious Service Medals. Lieutenant Colonel Vindman also, of course, was the top policy expert on Ukraine when on July 25th, 2019, he was sitting in the White House Situation Room listening to a call between President Trump and Ukrainian President Zelensky. His willingness to report the details of that call led to President Trump's first impeachment in December of 2019. Lieutenant Colonel Vindman has just released a memoir about his life and about the impeachment and everything that led to it called Here, Right Matters, about his role in it and the life experience which led up to it. The New York Times said in its review of Here, Right Matters, quote, "Even those who know the details of Trump's impeachment will find it chilling to hear them related by one of the event's chief figures. It's the story of an ordinary man placed in extraordinary circumstances who did the right thing." Alex, welcome to The Thoughtful Bro.
Thanks for having me, Mark. Looking forward to the conversation.
This is going to be great. It's going to be great. So there's so much to get to, obviously, but I have to say one of the main questions that came to me on social media ahead of this was basically, how are you? People are worried about whether you're doing okay. So just how are you, Alex?
Yeah, I'm okay, but I'm okay because of an enormous amount of diligence and industriousness, I guess, that allowed me to achieve some things during my military career. I think in a lot of ways, I when I get this question, I try to raise the issue of what whistleblowers face when they report wrongdoing. It is a enormous amount of backlash. It's an enormous amount of tumult, and their lives are upended. And frankly, that was the starting point for me when I reported the president's abuse of power. It upended my military career, which was on a extremely fast trajectory. In a lot of ways, I was very, very fortunate to have the positions I had, and I didn't really know where I was going to go to from there because I'd kind of moved so fast through different positions. I was destined to become a colonel, destined to go to war college, and all that was kind of upended by the president's not just his abuse and my report of it, but also retaliation. I needed to then really kind of figure out what I wanted to do, and in those closing, weeks before I had to submit my retirement, I decided that I wanted to continue to work on the U.S. national security, which meant getting an advanced degree and taking all the work I was doing in the classified space and kind of, putting it through the ringer, through some academic scrutiny, and working on my doctorate with Johns Hopkins. I joined a DC think tank that has focused on national security issues in a practical sense, the Lawfare Institute. I joined the board of a non-governmental organization called the Renew Democracy Initiative to help kind of continue to beat the drum of the fact that our democracy is actually under pressure and we need to do more to protect it for ourselves and for future generations. And we've been pretty active on trying to identify practical steps to do so. This book that's come out, I'm working on my dissertation. So a lot of things going on, but I haven't quite figured out what I want to do, in the long term. I bought myself a couple of years. I'm well more than a year into those couple of years, and I need to try to figure out, what is it that I want to do? Do I want to teach? Do I want to be in the think tank space? Do I want to do some consulting and kind of just join the private sector for a little while, take a break from government? Or is there at some point an opportunity to come back into government and continue to contribute? In all of those perches, I'm keen on advancing U.S. national security interests. I've been quite vocal and probably will be increasingly vocal on holding U.S. leaders accountable when they fall short of their obligations. Sometimes that's to my own detriment. I wrote an article pretty critical of Mark Milley and shortcomings. Probably didn't help with the fact that the Department of Defense was already kind of, not fond of me, as I was drawn into a political fray that cast a shadow over the military, not my own choice, and then just advocating for public servants that don't have a voice. So that's what I've taken on, and that's what I'll continue to do, regardless of what career I pick moving forward.
Well, of course, embedded in your book is this great irony, which is that, the classic story of the American immigrant is the American immigrant comes here to build a better life, but typically that means financially. And, your family fled the Soviet Union. Your father came here and started over when he was 47, got a job in Brooklyn, lifting furniture for $20 a day. But his American dream was one which was an American dream of freedom and an American dream of kind of liberty and an escape from an authoritarian and corrupt government. And the irony, I'm not the first to observe the irony that here you are in America, probably doing the last thing you ever thought you would do, which is actually fighting corruption and holding up democracy here.
That's true. I didn't necessarily think about the, fighting corruption and holding up democracy here, but I had committed myself to a life and career of advancing U.S. national security interests and defending this country. I guess in the general broader sense, I knew what I was going to be doing defending this country. I thought it was going to be, I did so on the battlefield. I did so in embassies overseas. I did so, in the kind of the highest policy and national security roles. That's where I envisioned making a contribution, but it ended up being maybe even in certain ways more focused on the national stage, exposing corruption and attack on our democracy. And it's not where I expected it to come from, but wherever it was going to come from, I knew what I was going to do.
Right. And so I want to begin on a slightly lighter note before we dig into actually what happened on that call and all your decision making, which is just so fascinating and really one of the great historical dramas for our country. But before we go there, I just want to read something that former Republican Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger said about you. And I'm going to resist doing my Arnold Schwarzenegger voice. And I've been doing it in the lead up to this call, but I'm going to resist doing it on air because it's truly terrible. But I'll just read in my plain old accent. This is what Schwarzenegger had to say about you. Alex did the heroic move. He became my hero. And I wanted to know what kind of person has the balls to do that. There's one thing that Alex has that not many politicians have. He didn't care about keeping his job. People who protect their party are not true patriots. Patriots are people who protect their country. And then he went on to say, when a government starts lying to its people, it leads them down a dangerous road, a road that must be stopped at all costs. Those who have tried to overthrow our country have not succeeded because of people like Alex. So how did that feel to hear him say that to you?
Well, he's a childhood icon. He's my hero. So I guess in a way I'm a hero's hero. So I'll take that. Uh, no, I mean it was pretty awesome. I think that's just a small bit of uh, I guess a small bit of ointment to a wound where I have a chance to interact with these phenomenal folks, heroes, childhood heroes of mine, and share some experiences, maybe help kind of move this country in the right direction. What I thought was most interesting about that conversation that I had with him is he, like me, is laser focused on advancing the U.S. through unity. We're strongest when we come together, and I've always felt that way. That we need to somehow figure out how to bring this country together, and the e pluribus unum that's on our currency. But I also recognize in that conversation that there is a bit of a disconnect with how to do that. And I think there are folks that have a role in cheerleading, bringing the country together, and then there are people like me that say that the way to bring this country together is through accountability, and it's through taking a hard look of where we're falling short and making sure that we address those issues, whether that's in fact again elected officials that swear an oath to the Constitution, but pander to an individual, pander to a man, Donald Trump, or that there folks in my former in my chain of command, including the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, that I think is falling short on his obligations and protecting the institutions of. And I guess I could. It's a bit of a hard place to be because you're not necessarily making friends. You're taking the kind of your base of support in certain ways, and you're carving it up because you're kind of in the case of Mark Milley, I'm there. There are people that think he's doing a great job in government, or people that take a very simplistic partisan view that, well, he's part of the Biden administration, he's not part of the Trump administration, therefore we need to protect him at all costs. So, and taking a position on accountability, making sure that we address these fundamental issues, so like this we can be stronger, come together. I think that's my role, and that's something that I'm prepared to fill. Maybe Arnold sensed some of that, and
Yeah.
Was complimentary on that basis. I'll take it. I think the guy's pretty amazing.
He is amazing. And I think another thing that came out of that interview that you two did was just this kind of love for freedom in this country that only an immigrant who comes from a country that didn't have such freedoms can have. And I think that was a level that you two both had a passion. You know what it's like in other places. But so, folks, Alex has been kind enough we might go a little bit later than the usual 2:45. We might go up to 3. But I just want to let folks know we're going to take a little bit of time here to actually walk through everything that Alex experienced starting on the morning of July 25th, 2019, because there's so much curiosity and outright fascination around kind of what was going through your head as these events unfolded that changed the history of our country. So let's go back to it's the morning of July 25th, 2019. You have this call between Trump and Zelensky, and you're on your way. This is where the book begins. And by the way, the book is terrific. It read like All the President's Men to me. It was just clear, fast. It read like a political thriller. Then also, I'm just going to go on my geeky writing tangent for a second, but all the backstory, and this is not always what you see in memoir, all the backstory was so relevant because all the backstory you told led up to kind of you exploring, why did I make the decisions I did? And you sort of can't understand. It's a classic character development in a way. Like, for a writer, you can't understand who you were that day and why you chose what you did without understanding your past. So this is my way of saying how much I love the book and the way it was told and the way it was structured. But you begin the book on that morning, and there's so much strange stuff in the air, and you at this point can't put the pieces together. There is Ambassador Yovanovitch has been smeared and recalled. The $400 million in military aid is on hold by the White House. Nobody knows why. There's that crazy meeting with Sondland and Bolton, where Bolton says, I'm not going to be part of this drug deal. But at this point, you just don't really know what's happening. And just describe for me kind of your state of mind as you are about to dial in and be a part of that call in the Situation Room.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. The beginning of this question was, so I guess events that changed the course of U.S. history, and I find that a very interesting way to frame it, because a lot of people don't necessarily recognize that this was a pivotal moment. If this call was not reported, it's quite possible and very likely that President Trump would have been successful in getting the Ukrainians to deliver an investigation into Joe Biden, and Joe Biden may have never made it through the primaries. He would have been too damaged.
And in fact, he was Zelensky was scheduled to be on Fareed Zakaria on September 13th to announce these investigations. Is that true? Or
that's true, and it's funny because he was just on Fareed Zakaria, within the past 2 weeks. Fareed was in and I saw him. I was at a conference in Kiev, and at the end of the conference, they finally did have that encounter, but it was all without the pressures of the president of the United States looking to again tip the scales in his favor, undo free and fair elections. But it's and that, I guess, how many years on is that? That's almost exactly 2 years on from when things were likely to unfold. So it's pretty fascinating in the counterfactual, this alternate world where President Trump would have been going up against maybe less ideal candidates, like him or not, Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders, and potentially could have had a second term, which would have been a disaster for the United States. So I appreciate you kind of that thoughtful introduction. Of course, at the time, going into the phone call, I hadn't necessarily considered facts in that manner. What I did see was, over the preceding months, a very, very troubling, progressively increasing risk to U.S. foreign policy with regards to Ukraine, but not just Ukraine, but U.S. foreign policy, our objectives for that part of the world. And initially, it seemed like it was coming from, political actors that were looking to ingratiate themselves. It became increasingly evident that it was more than that. There were people within the government that were supporting this enterprise, this corrupt enterprise. And, it was folks like Gordon Sondland. It was folks like Mick Mulvaney that were behind the scenes. And then the only thing that I really learned out of that phone call was that it wasn't just people looking to ingratiate themselves with the president. It was the president that was the driving force. The president wanted this. He had directed his staff to pursue this corrupt enterprise to try to steal an election that he proceeded to try to steal for the subsequent, year and a half, ultimately culminating in an insurrection. So we just saw the tip of the iceberg about how far he was willing to go. That was almost sedate compared to rousing a crowd to attack the Capitol building. But that was that was where we saw it unfold in that phone call. And that's what I reported. I perceived that danger, I guess, and maybe I think partially explicitly because I walked into my twin brother's office and I said, Eugene, if the president ever, if the substance of this phone call ever becomes public, the president would be impeached. I was just, commenting on the weight, on the importance of the moment, but maybe implicitly, I also perceived the risks, given the president that was corrupt and self-serving, how far he was going to go.
Before we get to that great moment in your brother's office, let's just slow down for a moment and talk about the call. I mean, you described Trump as being very kind of dour, kind of in a morbid mood, totally disengaged from the phone call. And then but he did perk up at one point. And just can you just walk us through that call and then the moment when the call turned?
Yeah. Well, I think that's exactly right. That's the way it started. And then when President Zelensky mentioned that he wanted to purchase using Ukrainian finances additional javelins, that's where we had the famous "I'd like you to do us a favor, though" line. And then he launched into a tirade, which you could see it actually in the transcript, but it doesn't come through as it does in real life, where he launches into all the things that the Ukrainians are ungrateful. Nobody does more for Ukraine than the U.S. And then he proceeds to launch into the "do us a favor, though" line, and talk about Biden being the corrupt actor, and all sorts of crazy stuff, like servers, like conspiracies, the stuff you see in conspiracy theories about servers in Ukraine, that basically cast a shadow over Trump's 2016 elections, and uh, getting a hold of Giuliani and connecting with Zelensky, and same thing with uh, um, Attorney General Barr, connecting him with Zelensky to get dirt on the Bidens.
Right.
That's really what it was about, and that's the part where he was both energized, and in response to Zelensky's deft handling, his dancing around the issue, in believing he got what he needed. Zelensky only went so far as to say, we'll do pass us the information. If there's something to investigate, we'll investigate. If we'll do this, transparently. We'll do it in the open. And Trump, not understanding that wasn't like code. Zelensky was just saying that's the way they would conduct an investigation. Thought he got what he needed, and he kind of perked up and ended the conversation on a bit of a high note, saying, looking forward to seeing you. You need to win more elections. Or actually, I think he said that in the beginning. But anyway, it was kind of, that was the congratulatory report of the phone call. Yeah.
And you said that when he said this infamous line, "I need you to do us a favor, though," you said your head snapped up and you looked around the room, and you described having a visceral reaction. You're now listening to a president talking about manufacturing dirt on a U.S. citizen and a political rival, and you're having this visceral reaction. But still, the call, it's your job to be paying attention and be sure you don't miss anything. So you're having this reaction. But then once the call ends, you said you were immediately aware that nobody was going to report anything about this call. And if anybody was going to say anything, it would have to be you. Can you tell me why you knew that?
Well, I think I didn't necessarily even ponder if anybody else was going to report the call. I had already reported the meeting on June 10th, where I challenged Ambassador Sondland even before anybody. I had support from anybody else. I was like, we're just not going to do that. It's not national security. We're not going to engage in this corrupt enterprise. So I was basically, on multiple occasions, I was following through on my concern over how things were unfolding, how they were basically undermining U.S. national security. This is not a policy discussion. This was U.S. national security at stake. And what I did was I looked around. I kind of knew that it was a room in a lot of cases where most of the folks were political actors, political appointees, that they may or may not kind of share the same concerns, or even if they do share the same concerns, their concerns over their future career would supersede the concerns about U.S. national security. And I really, didn't. That was a hasty calculation, and I just knew what I was going to do. It was on my shoulders to report it. I was the director for Eastern Europe. I was the director for Ukraine. I knew what I was going to do, and it was going to be regardless of whether anybody else was going to take the same decision. I just knew that this is what I needed to do. That was my duty.
Right. Now, and it is a great point. You say you knew it was your duty. And this is something that, and I want to linger on this for a little bit of a moment here, because so many of the questions that have come in are about this pivotal moment when you decide to report it, and sort of everything that follows, including the impeachment, sort of hinge on this moment of you reporting it. And you say something in the book that I love so much. I love thinking about courage and why people make courageous decisions and what influences their analysis of risk, and why you took the steps you did on a deeper level. And that's something that I think many people are very interested in. And but I just want to be clear, You go on to say that you thought it was your duty, and so therefore it was like sort of a black and white issue in a way. It's like, this is my duty, I'm going to do it. But why was it your duty? Because some people might say, this is just a difference in policy. Lieutenant Colonel Vindman thinks policy is one thing, but the president thinks it's another, and that's that. But tell us why this specifically triggered your sense of duty.
So what's interesting is that, people believe like, policy, that the president is somehow directly involved in everything that happens. That's not the case. The president has purview over the whole globe, and really involved in very little policy. He sometimes weighs in on certain issues and provides policy direction. And we already had his kind of view on policy direction. He had signed off on a national security strategy in 2017, which really gave us our marching orders for the way the government was going to advance our interests with regards to Ukraine, with regards to Russia. And in addition to that, I had also, and then the president delegates authorities down to departments and agencies to do all the things that need to happen when the president's focus is not on an issue. So we were operating on everything that we knew U.S. policy to be with regards to Ukraine. We never got any contrary indications that the president either didn't like, it was even if we had something like he just didn't like Ukraine, that would be some sort of description of sorts. But we didn't even necessarily have that kind of insight. We just knew that he, in those moments, all we knew is that he was looking to try to apply pressure on Ukraine for a personal benefit, for a favorable outcome in the 2020 elections. That had nothing to do with policy. That had nothing to do with U.S. national security interests. To me, that was clearly the president attacking this idea of free and fair elections and doing all those dirty tricks that we counsel foreign governments not to participate in. All those things that, in previous times in U.S. history, when we had all these scandals, either at the national level or at the state level, New York, where I come from, was kind of famous for a number of these types of things, where political actors would seek to subvert free and fair elections, and anything from mechanically looking to to prevent people from voting, like we're seeing unfold now, to false investigations into adversaries, all those things that we thought we moved on from like 100 years ago, kind of coming back into our politics now. And I saw this as an enormous risk to the United States that had absolutely nothing to do with policy. It had, the president was looking to extract an investigation from a partner that's at war, a partner that's willing to potentially deliver whatever is required to protect that country at war with a much, much more powerful enemy, and to secure $400 million in aid, to secure a White House meeting. And to me, all of these things, watching it unfold over the preceding months, it was absolutely clear this was in no way a policy dispute. It was never a policy dispute. Policy dispute is this thing, the label that partisans of the president put on something to distract from the real issue, which is presidential corruption. There is no policy dispute anywhere around this.
Right.
Last point.
Please.
The last point is to indicate how this was not a policy dispute. After the call, I talked to my boss, Tim Morrison, and said, did we get any policy direction from that call? His answer is no. The next day, we had a deputies small group, which is the deputies for all the departments and agencies. So you have the cabinet level officials, then they're the deputy secretary of defense, the deputy national security advisor, the deputy secretary of state, coming together and saying and underscoring what our policy was for Ukraine. And it was exactly, the policy that I was in place before the phone call, which is greater engagement with Ukraine, more, and these are the president's people. These are the people that the president appointed in those positions, believing that they were advancing U.S. national security interests, believing this is what the U.S. policy was. And all we had was kind of an erratic president kind of spouting off like he did done on numerous other occasions that didn't necessarily mean anything for U.S. policy.
Right. And I think just to kind of put a button on this part of the conversation about whether it was courageous, I was talking with a friend of mine who's an Army Ranger yesterday, and he was saying, you speak so eloquently in the book about all the reasons that you were courageous." He said you didn't see it as standing up to Trump; it was just about doing your duty. You said you had grandfathers who fought the Nazis. You had so many examples within your military career of courage. And then also this just kind of general sense of duty, as you just described. And, my friend, the Army Ranger, was just saying yesterday, he said, following an order and, charging a hill or running into a bunch of bullets is not nearly as courageous as what Alex did, because Alex must have known that millions and millions of people would hate him for what he did. And so I guess the final point on this is, do you think that you're a particularly courageous person? Was this a courageous act?
I guess I would consider I typically tend to be ballsy, and there's a couple of stories in the book that indicate that. My risk meter might not be the same as other people's risk meters, but in reporting those phone calls behind closed channels, that was one thing. Maybe it took a little bit of courage to kind of be like the lone voice reporting in channels. What potentially could be argued as the courageous action is like testifying to this, right, and not giving like half-measured testimony the way the Department of Defense probably would have preferred, where I'm just there answering yes or no, being a reluctant witness, but actually, speaking what I thought was in fact going to be extremely polarizing and make me the target of potentially certainly elected officials, the right-wing media, and I don't want to say tens of millions of people, like some thousands of strident Trump supporters. We'll go that we'll right, take it that far. But I appreciate, I'll tell you that I appreciate that commentary from your friend who's an Army Ranger, because those are particularly meaningful. I mean, again, I'll take it back to, I just wrote an article in Washington Post on Mark Milley, and it was interesting. I was talking to a active duty Army lieutenant colonel, battalion commander, and he appreciated the fact that I was willing to question the chairman of the Joint Chiefs on perceived missteps that would have easily destroyed anybody's career, at the colonel and below level, probably at the 1 or 2 star general, but somehow the chairman of the Joint Chiefs gets a pass, even though there I could recount 3-4 times that he made a critical error in judgment that probably upended civil military relations, politicized the military. And I think we frankly don't have enough people that are willing to put a little bit of skin in the game and question those types of demand accountability. And that's part of why we find ourselves where we are today. We find ourselves in a situation where political elites believe the bar has fallen low enough where they could get away with anything, instead of the bar is increased or progressively increased, where we demand more of our politicians. And I think that's really one of the things that we need to focus in on as we go into the next election cycles. Have people lived up to their oaths? Have people lived up to the promises that they've given? And I think too often that's not the case, and that's something we need to continue to address, frankly.
Right. I'm glad you brought up Milley and addressed that, because that was, I have to say, the most popular question on social media that came through when I asked people what they wanted to talk about, and people just generally like comparing you two and saying, like, weren't both of you in a situation where the president's erratic behavior you thought might trigger a national security crisis, and therefore you took an unusual step in order to stop it? And sort of, aren't those just similar situations? And clearly, in your view, they're not.
Well, I think it's important to make a couple of key points here. Even if he did the wrong thing for the right reason, let's say he stood in the breach in the pivotal moment of danger. He stood in the breach and protected this country. He is still the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and he must be accountable to the civilian leadership. So if he did something to subvert civilian control of the military, there's still an accountability that's required. I mean, I all I did was testify to what I witnessed, and I basically found myself on the outs with the military, end of a military career, and I was a lieutenant colonel. Should the bar be higher or lower for the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. I feel like the higher up you go, the requirements should be that much more stringent. In addition to the fact that I think this chairman had the opportunity to, right now he's protesting. We see these reports that he was protesting the president. He was doing it behind closed doors, but they're unfolding publicly. That's not by chance. Those are orchestrated. And so at the time where he could have protested, resigned, protested, and made his voice heard, actually had a meaningful impact, he stayed silent. But now, months later, we have people, either him or his proxies, metering out this information to the public about, how he was there trying to do the right thing, which really does harm to this idea of an apolitical military. At least half the country, just like I burned bridges with half the country by just doing the right thing, he's doing this by saying all the things that he's doing, all the concerns he had behind the scenes, all the actions he'd taken behind the scenes. That's not good. If we want our military to remain apolitical, then we need to have apolitical leaders. And if you politicize yourself, then again, there's accountability. So, I mean, there's multiple reasons. We're not even getting into the discussion about Afghanistan and the kind of advice he was providing to President Biden in the waning days of our commitment to Afghanistan, that suggested that the Afghan military would hang on for longer. We're not even getting to this idea of accountability for military leaders that repeatedly, in dozens of testimonies to Congress, would say that everything is getting better. We just need a little more time, and Afghanistan will prosper. Those all turned out to be false testimonies. So, I mean, there are so many different things. I think, frankly, in a way, there's an opportunity to reset, pick a less controversial chairman, somebody that's equally capable of doing the job, somebody that's not political, and start the business of healing, I guess.
And Alex, if you could just, before we move on, you're taking a stance against General Milley when people criticize you, they say, oh, you're an anti-Trump or whatever. It's so ridiculous, of course. Now here you're taking a position against Milley, somebody who is also viewed as anti-Trump. So now you're anti-Trump. Clearly you can't be pigeonholed, which is proper. But I guess just boil it down to me in one sentence. What is the thread that is running through your entire your critique of anybody from Trump to Milley and onward? Just boil it down for me.
I think it's one word. It's accountability. I think people should be accountable for their actions, and that's regardless of the party. It's not just Democratic Party or Republican Party. People should be accountable. I think if we have accountability, we have better leaders.
Okay.
That's really what the continuous thread is, I guess, based on what I say and what I write.
Great. Got it. So, I mean, that's how we know we'll be able to predict your point of view. I mean, wherever there is accountability to be had, there shall you be. So let's just move quickly on through some of these events. I mean, I know you've recounted them before, but they're too fascinating to pass up. I just think to kind of wrap up the discussion about courage, and there's so much great stuff, folks, in the book about risk analysis. And we're not going to get into it here for a matter of time, but I loved your point of view on risk, particularly in that doing the way you described how doing nothing is also a risk. And there's this great line that I love. As in foreign affairs, so in political and everyday life, inaction in the face of corruption has an inevitable effect. And could you just go one step further and just say, what is the inevitable effect of inaction in the face of corruption?
The inevitable effect is again, since we're on the Mark Milley topic, or actually, let's just sidestep that, because there's a logic to Milley being paraded through Lafayette Square, and the lack of I think that was maybe midway through. Sorry, not holding up values with regards to an officer that did the right thing, led the president potentially believe that he could then parade the chairman of the Joint Chiefs to Lafayette Square, and that he could indicate that the military supported him going into insurrection. But there's even a much more probably like concrete example. If the Senate held the president accountable, for his misdeeds and upon his first impeachment, censured him or removed him, we know that we would have not had a catastrophic mismanagement of the COVID pandemic that's resulted in 675,000 dead. It's going to be 250,000 probably by the time we're done. Just I think Pence would have not managed it the same way. He would not have seen the merits in discounting the fact that we have a pandemic, for some sort of personal gain. He was more of a conventional type of politician that had run a state before. He would have had a crisis response. We would have not had a president that inflamed civil unrest in the summer of 2020, and instead of trying to figure out how to kind of, end the violence around the murder of George Floyd, inflame it. We would have not had the economic mismanagement of of those early days of the pandemic. Really, frankly, through the rest of the year, there were so many times where a key bit of indecision resulted in greater catastrophe. I think I just laid out several of those, but indecision is a decision in its own right. And sometimes we tend to think, well, there's another opportunity to weigh in, make a decision at a later point. That might be true sometimes, but sometimes there's a pivotal moment where if you don't take a decision at that moment, you're indicating your either willingness to be flexible on values and ethics. You're indicating your willingness to let the president act with impunity. So that's an example of inaction being inaction in its own right. And then you have predators like Donald Trump that see this and know exactly how to exploit it.
Thank you so much for going into that. I find those to be some of the most interesting psychologically and some of the most inspiring portions of the book when you talk about, risk analysis and courage and things like that. So anyway, well, we're going to get to some audience questions in a bit. I had so many more questions to ask you. I wanted to talk about Fiona Hill, who is like you. I think I love how you describe in the book one of the silver linings of this whole process is that you get to see these career civil servants and military folks who are just so absolutely impressive. I mean, I have found this actually throughout the Trump administration, where unfortunately there have been so many public hearings of this kind, where you start to see these top layers of the military and the FBI and the CIA, and you just think to yourself, oh my goodness, there are really good people running our government and our military. And certainly Fiona Hill was one of them. But I just want to pick up on something Fiona Hill said about you, and this came up during the hearings, is that it was Fiona Hill overall gave you absolutely sterling marks and said you were, I don't know what she said, like the top 1% of people she'd ever served with and so on and so forth. I mean, her review of your character was absolutely sterling, but she did make a remark in passing to your then boss, Tim Morrison, that, maybe you were naive about political matters. And I want to just give you a moment to dig into that, because I think that naivete, the way she might have meant it, is sort of what caused you to speak out in one way, and it also caused this uproar in your life that changed your life so much. And so it sort of seems like a central kind of observation about your character. And I just wanted to give you a moment to talk about it.
That's an interesting analysis. I think the fact is that I wasn't necessarily seeing what she was seeing in the White House. She was the senior director. I was a director, so she participated in the political class of dialogue on various issues. The political appointees that served in those positions, and therefore I couldn't necessarily navigate those issues as well because I just I wasn't in those meetings. I think in terms of like big picture judgments on politics, was it apparent that it was all but certain the Senate was going to acquit President Trump? Yes, but it wasn't my job as an apolitical officer to kind of try to figure out how to, whether I should be testifying or not. My job was to provide testimony and let the political actors that get paid the big bucks in Congress kind of figure out where to take that information, whether they impeach and whether they remove. That was their decision. I don't know. I mean, I tend to be a pretty good analyst with regards to foreign relations on what's going on in other countries. I mean, I kind of, I predicted Zelensky was going to win, and that it was an important opportunity for us to put together this action plan to double down. I don't know. I don't know. I don't want to discount her that potentially useful critical feedback. If anything, it made me be a little bit more kind of introspective about where my shortfalls were. I just don't know if it's as simple as like not having any political antenna or political radar. I guess it's somewhere in between. And if my worst criticism is that I'm not politically savvy enough, I'll take it.
Well, and another way that, and we're going to get to audience questions right after this, so I can tell my producer to get ready. But one other read, Alex, that I have on that comment is that comment was made to one of Pence's guys, Tim Morrison, who was your boss. And there's a read that I have on it that maybe it was even a kind of warning to him that like if you try to do something that is purely political and unethical with Alex, just know it might not go over.
I think Fiona's pretty darn sophisticated. Hopefully you speak to her when her book comes out next month, but it could be very well that she was offering that she was definitely offering the whole set of commentary around the issue as a warning about what to be careful for as she handed off her her position to her replacement. So I hadn't thought about it that way, but that's okay. Again, I'm willing to take the criticism of that I'm not political enough.
Right. Okay, let's get into some questions from the audience. Feel free to throw. Okay, here we go from Alistair Mook. Hi, Alistair. Alex, first, thank you for your service to the country. It sounds like you had already been aware of previous ways which Trump was undermining U.S. policy and veering towards, if not actively practicing, corruption. Did you anticipate the direction this call was going to go, and were there previous opportunities to blow the whistle?
So I did anticipate that there was a lot of risk. I mean, certainly the way the call unfolded itself suggested that this was going to be, maybe there was a little bit of wishful thinking about this call going off as planned. We basically had a pretty good, I had a great idea that, Zelensky and his party were going to have a landslide victory in the parliamentary elections. And we proposed this call for President Trump to congratulate President Zelensky on July 21st. Ambassador Bolton recognized the risks and basically declined to recommend the call. So it was off the plate. Several days later, after we had moved past the phone call, it lands again. And I learned that it was because Gordon Sondland, had a conversation with Mick Mulvaney, and they added the call back on. So of course the warning lights were on that. Why was it the culmination of this effort? But I still thought that there's a reasonable chance that Zelensky, who is pretty charismatic, might be able to kind of do something with this phone call and move the relationship in a good direction. With regards to other opportunities to blow the whistle, there were other fairly concerning things that I observed in the White House. None of them were as clear-cut or potentially criminal as this one. There were things that were awful, but not unlawful. And I wasn't seeing everything. I was seeing kind of a sliver with regards to Europe. But there were other things. I mean, I guess the question is, I don't know how folks necessarily get access to those unless there's a more holistic investigation of presidential wrongdoing, because all these things are protected by the Presidential Records Act and executive privilege. But yeah, this isn't the only time that there were issues.
All right, let's have another question. How do you feel, regardless of party line, who do you feel, regardless of party line, is being most accountable in the present? There are so many books and accounts coming out, such as the book by Adam Schiff. Who is maybe the meaning of this question is, who is somebody who kind of you feel like is somebody who is very accountable and kind of fits your mold as you see it?
I admire Adam Schiff. I think he was a patriot that was looking to expose presidential wrongdoing. He took an enormous amount of heat for it. I thought that he presented a compelling case both in the House and then in testimony in the Senate. I think, frankly, the easier way to answer this is who is falling short. I think the Republicans are falling way short of their obligations and with regards to accountability. I think it's the Republican Party. It's hard to kind of to imagine the Republican Party straying further from kind of the party of Lincoln than they are now. And I think, I'm not sure how the Republican Party gets back on course, but they're now they're the party of Donald Trump at the moment. And just to quickly, I'll mention that I think the Biden administration is looking to do good things for this country. I mean, they have a pretty robust agenda. They're looking to enact those policies that they were elected for. They're looking to manage crises that emerge, but where they're probably falling short on the accountability front is on accountability. They have not done enough to deal with the wounds from the previous 4 years, and I guess I'm becoming increasingly critical about the fact that there needs to be more done, because this country didn't magically return back to normal January 21st, 2020 or 2021 rather. We have things that haven't been addressed, where you have weakened institutions. Unless there's accountability, we're going to be weaker the next time an authoritarian wannabe steps into power.
And Alex, I just want to follow up on that quickly, and then we'll continue with the questions from the audience. But to summarize a question I got many, many times on social media, it was this: people are really afraid. And they're afraid. They were afraid after the election. They were afraid that Trump might use the military to stay in power. They were afraid of things like what you reported, which is that there are other ways that democracy is going to be subverted. And people are afraid that our institutions could collapse. And I guess I just want to ask you sort of point blank, are you afraid? And if not, why not? And how do you deal with this feeling of fear?
Well, I guess there are two elements to that one. First of all, am I afraid? Based on my sense of this country, I'm not afraid, but I'm concerned. So it's like raise the alarm without being alarmist. I am concerned about the fact that there might be complacency going into local, state, and federal elections, and that the far right that's looking to hang on to power under any circumstances, including subverting people's right to vote, is going to be successful. And I wanted to raise the alarm and say that people need to continue to be engaged. They were the way they were in 2018 and 2020. We can't have a return to kind of norms that things are going to fall back to more established patterns. And I think this is a country where right matters. It might not matter for everybody, but right matters for many, many Americans. Right matters where people want, what's good for this country, want what's good for their community, and just need to be kind of reminded about the risks out there, and are willing to step in and try to, serve this country's interests. And I just try to do my small role about, trying to urge people to make right matter in their lives, in their communities.
Thank you. All right, let's get a few more questions from the audience, if we can. Given the ongoing threat of Trumpism and that fact that it took your whistleblowing to uncover the scandal, how confident are you that the U.S. military will resist unconstitutional efforts by future would-be authoritarian presidents?
Under the current circumstances, absolutely confident. So one of the reasons I wrote this piece in the Washington Post is because I found it puzzling that people were thinking that Chairman was the one man in the breach holding back disaster. That is not true. We have tens of thousands of service members all looking to advance U.S. national security interests. In the Pentagon, we have more than eight chiefs of staff, each one of them capable of stepping in and becoming the chairman. And we have a vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs. So if Milley had stepped aside, there was somebody there that would have automatically stepped into position. It wouldn't have been one of those things where the president could appoint an acting as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, because he would have to select somebody from active duty ranks. He couldn't, and that would it would be a process that would have unfolded. And so there were plenty of people that could have been there to, hold back the tide of authoritarianism. I think there is a danger that there's this notion that the military has to be there in order to be the brake on civilian abuse, and that's dangerous. We don't want our military to do that kind of stuff. They have a role in national defense. They don't have a role in kind of in the politics of this country. And I think if we don't hold people accountable, we're positioning ourselves for that kind of world. And just to quickly wrap up this idea, the military does tend to be very apolitical, except except in that they sometimes tend to see opportunities and risks with regards to politics, and they navigate around them instead of defaulting to very objective values-based decisions on what's right and what's wrong. It's in this navigation that that the senior military sometimes trips themselves up and believes that they could, like, as on a infantile level, navigate politics. We shouldn't do that. And that's another thing that I'm concerned about, and why I've spoken out about Mark Milley.
Thank you. All right, a few more questions from the audience. Do you have hope for the future of our democracy, given the hyperpartisanship in our government and our society at large?
Yes.
Thank you,
Jane. Part of it is because I have perspective from living overseas. I have perspective, and this is what I talk about in the book. This answers the why. Living overseas, seeing authoritarian regimes, allowed me to easily identify the why of reporting the phone call. The other part of that book was the how, what I learned about navigating and risk and all these other things. But the general idea is that this country is still the really the best country in the world, and filled with a bounty of terrific Americans. So I have pretty significant confidence in this country moving on. But again, it's after we identify where the weaknesses were for these previous 4 years. We managed to survive the peril of a corrupt chief executive. We just need to make sure we don't elect another corrupt chief executive, somebody that's frankly far more competent than Donald Trump, because Donald Trump didn't know more on his last day in office than he did on his first day in office. I don't think we're going to get that lucky again with a chief executive of that kind.
Right. Great. All right. One more question from the audience, and then we'll wrap after that. Total side question from Margaret. What does Alex read to get his mind off important matters?
Well, at the moment, I was talking to my cousin who's visiting. She's a professor, a poli-sci professor, and we both found out that we like to kind of like veg out and watch, some shows, some sci-fi and stuff like that, to take our mind off of the fact that we read an enormous amount of stuff in the political historical sphere. Like, I'm working on a dissertation, and there are still a dozen books that I need to read before I could really kind of write this thing, write the darn dissertation in a make it a quality work. So I don't read any nonfiction at the moment, even though I used to enjoy nonfiction and sci-fi stuff. I read a lot of history, political science, foreign affairs type stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Thank you. All right, great. So just a couple more questions for me, and then we'll wrap. But one question I just really wanted to ask you was, it may seem like a strange question, and feel free to dismiss it, but I think it's pretty fair to say that you are a key figure in a key episode in American history, and which isn't to say that you've written your last chapter. I mean, you have a lot of life left to live, and a lot of ways left to help this country. But I guess I just was wondering, do you ever think of yourself as an historical figure? And I mean, and if you do, I don't even know what you would do with such a feeling as that. I mean, do you become self-conscious or look at yourself from the outside ever in that way?
I'm concerned about becoming a historical figure at this moment. And the reason is that if I'm a historical figure, it's based on, somebody else, or not because I managed to impact history in a way that I wanted to. It's because I'm defined by standing up to presidential corruption in the Trump administration. And as a as somebody in their 40s that had kind of ambitions and aspirations to continue to be impactful and influential, I find it troubling to be defined by something in my past as opposed to maybe defining myself in the future. So I struggle against this idea of being defined by just purely the Trump episode. I want to have an impact in a different way, to continue to advance U.S. national security. That's what drives me to do like 5 or 6 different things instead of like focusing on 1 or 2 different things, because I don't want to be defined in that manner.
What a wonderful answer. So we're going to wrap with a question that I ask all the folks who come on the show. And mostly I talk to fiction folks, but it's maybe like 1/3 nonfiction. And this question might be a little bit more difficult to answer for a nonfiction work. But just imagine, if you could, the ideal reader for your book, somebody who is getting it in just the way that you would hope that they would get it. And imagine that they get to the end of this book. Just describe for me, in a word or phrase, what is the feeling that you leave this reader with when they finish reading your book?
Hope. And I think hope, and there's another word I'm struggling for right now, but hope and optimism, I guess, would be the way where I'd want people to leave with. This is not a kind of sad story. I mean, it's a kind of sad episode, but it's not a sad story. It's about somebody that could live with the consequences of doing the right thing and move on. And my ideal reader is, I know older people tend to read, and I want young people to read this book. I want young people to read this book and be motivated and inspired about public service, and recognize that they have the ability to. One person can make a difference. They could make things. They could actually have an impact on the future, and that drives them to do that. That's what I hope for.
That's terrific. What a great place to end. Folks out there, thank you so much. I know we had a big crowd today, and I got to as many questions as we could. Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman, thank you so much for your service to this country. Thank you for being on the show today. The book is here. Right Matters, folks. Go ahead and buy a few copies. Thank you, Alexander.
Bye.